herself, and so she also founded Tin Fish Press. And today we have Timothy Dyke with us, who has published his poetry through Tin Fish Press, and we're going to have a conversation about Susan's newest book, which was kind of inspired by the pandemic, right? And her beloved, wonderful dog, Lilith. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing this conversation sort of organically happen, kind of like how the vignettes in here sort of evolved as Susan went on walks with her dog. And after the conversation and after the Q&A, we will have a time where you can chat with Susan and even Timothy. We have one of his books here too. You can do a signing. I think even Lilith has an opportunity to paw sign her book. It's actually a stamp though. It's not gonna be like grabbing her paw, but you know, so thank you for coming, and we're ready to roll. And books are available for purchase at the register after.
Hey Lilith. Hi everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I was definitely honored and flattered to be able to be part of a conversation with Susan. I always like talking to Susan. First, let me make sure, can people hear me? Okay, great. And yeah, I'm mildly intimidated about the word conversation because it means, you know, I have to be spontaneous, which I love being with Susan, but I also don't want to talk too much. So I'll start with just a kind of simple question. I don't know if it's simple, but I read the book, and I totally love the book, and I had a couple different experiences with it. One is each piece kind of works on its own to me as like a standalone prose poem. But then I think I was telling you today, it also almost reads like a novel to me because there are characters who kind of recur, and maybe it's a memoir also. So I'll have specific things that I want to talk to you about, but just at first in a really general way, how would you describe the book? If someone said, what kind of book is this? What would you say about that?
It's a book of short narratives about walking with Lilith during, it was 2017 to 2020, 21, so it was during COVID and the unmentionable president's term. So a lot of it was just going around and waiting for conversations to happen and then going home and writing them down. So.
Yeah, did you know, I mean, obviously you walk Lilith all the time, and you would walk Lilith even if you weren't writing a book. What point did you feel like, oh, I'm writing a book now? Or was it super organic that it was walking, it was chatting, and then suddenly it was a book? I don't know, maybe you can talk about your process.
The first one in here, which I'll read,
that'd be great.
Is, this was probably the one that made me realize that something was going on. By the way, my mother-in-law, Anne, drew the portrait of Lilith, which is on the cover, so that's where that comes from. So this one was from 2017. It's called Divorce Emissary. I took Lilith on her late afternoon constitutional. She had just pooped for the 4th time today, and I'd scooped it up into one of those green bags that management provides so we don't leave pet poop around, when a woman in an old blue van pulled into guest parking and asked if I live here. Yes. Down at the end, she asked? No, in the middle. She said she'd give me $10 to take an envelope to someone at the end of the parking lot. Her husband had been living with his girlfriend for a couple years down there. He's nice to other people, she said. I asked if it would help if I walked her to the door, and she said no. So again, waving off the $10 and signing a form to the effect that I would deliver the divorce papers, Lilith and I headed off. We entered through a gate into a small courtyard and were greeted by a bounding dog and lots of yapping. It's where the odd woman with lots of chihuahuas lives. She talks to them loudly as if they're difficult people. Mr. P got up, fortunately it was he, and came to the door, smiling quizzically at me and Lilith. Don't ask me how I got involved in this, I said. Handed him the manila envelope, turned, and walked out the gate.
That's very neat. Each one has like a little bit of suspense, tension to it, and then it all kind of builds as I read along too. When you say you knew you had something, can you tell me what you mean? Or?
It's just so strange.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a writer anyway, and I'm also rather too much on the Crackbook Facebook.
Got it.
And so I like to share these stories. So what I started doing was, after I discovered that these stories kept happening, was I would go home and I would basically write them into that little square on Facebook where it says, what's on your mind? And I'd write the little narrative and I'd kind of play with it. And then I would get strong responses.
Yeah.
Like the response to this one was, watch out you don't get shot. I was like, no, it's Hawaii, I'm okay. At least for now, until that gun bill doesn't happen. So yeah, so then these stories just happen all the time. I just wrote one this morning.
So you moved them from Facebook to like a notebook or something?
Yeah, I would put them on my blog, which no one reads because blogs are so passé, just as a way to sort of archive them.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point I realized I've got a lot of these, so
Yeah.
I'll do something with them.
Do you want to read a couple more? Just that if we're sort of in the mode of like figuring out what this book is about, you want to read a couple that you feel like are representative? Or?
Okay. Phoebe's not here yet. I have one about Phoebe, but okay. Doggy bags. It's more about pooping, I guess.
I have a question about pooping, but I'll wait for
Lilith had already pooped twice. There's a theme here. When we got to the cemetery and I had no more bags, I looked up to see an African American man in a Tall Man Theory t-shirt with Pitbull and another big dog striding toward us. An extra poop bag, I asked. I thought she'd finished for the morning, but she decided to grace the cemetery too. He took off his headphones and I asked again. While explaining that his dogs prefer people to other dogs, he handed me 3 bags, 2 of which fell to the ground. 3 bags, I exclaimed, scooping them up. I have lots, he said, as they kept walking. He turned back to say, dog owners are like cigarette smokers, always bumming off each other. Okay, let's see. Some of them are less happy.
read some unhappy ones. That made me happy.
A death in the neighborhood. And this is on Hui Killing Street in Hui Manu. I just talked to a class yesterday and someone in the class said, oh, I live there. 1, Saturday I talked to my neighbor. Her older dog Buddy made her anxious interacting with Lilith, as usual. A smallish brown dog with black snout, Buddy had had a tooth out, and that was after he had eye surgery. Buddy was costing her some money. But Buddy's eyes looked better, far less bloodshot, and he didn't seem to be in distress over the missing tooth. My neighbor had her wide-brimmed tan hat on, but didn't answer directly when I asked how she was. On Sunday, she died. 2, the things we leave behind. This was Charlene's car, she who died on Sunday. Months ago, I heard someone honking relentlessly, but not in the way a car alarm cries with regularity. I went out and found Charlene in her car, laying on her horn. Seems someone had taken her parking space. She thought that honking would draw the perpetrator out of one of the many townhouses around the parking lot. I assured her it wouldn't work. When I glanced in the car just now, I saw an orange and white squirt gun in one of the drink holders. That must have been for Buddy, whose civility she perpetually tried to govern.
about the, it's kind of I guess it's somewhat of a basic thing to say, but, we both teach students and maybe other people teach students, maybe we've all been students. And there's that idea that sometimes as a writing teacher that I try to get across that the more specific you are, actually the more universal the piece becomes. Sometimes students will want to make a piece that everyone can relate to, so they'll think they should be general. And this piece is so specific, that's what I was thinking about the poop bags. I was like, we wouldn't normally talk about poop bags, but if you have a dog, they're such a normal part of life. And so there's just so much of a sense for me of the specificity of your neighborhood and the people that you talk to and the places that Lilith Walks actually kind of opened it up to sort of have sort of a resonance about the president who shall not be named and the COVID, and just it was almost like through poop bags we got to 2020 and 2021 and 2022. I don't know if that makes sense.
In more ways than one,
Yeah,
yes.
that's true. Does that sense of like just the specificity of it resonate with you at all, or?
Yeah, and actually, toward the end of my teaching career, I got really obsessed with teaching attention.
Yeah.
Getting students to, I don't like pay attention, but to attend to
Give
the world
attention,
around
yeah.
them. And so when Lilith came along, I thought, oh wow, here's an attention hound, literally. So my first photographic project with her was to take photos of what she noticed, not what I noticed. And that was something of a photographic disaster, because it was little bits of grass, sides of fire hydrants. They were the most boring photos I've ever seen, but by the same token, it was just that absolute, utter focus that she has that taught me that I could do this on a human scale.
Yeah.
So I still take photos, but just not of little spots of grass.
Does Lilith lead the walks, or do you have a path that you go?
It depends. Some days when she's in a good mood, she'll just charge ahead. Other days she's dragging. I used to take her to my creative writing classes, and once in a semester we would go for a walk with Lilith, and Lilith got to choose where we went on the UH campus. There are parts of that UH campus that no human finds, and we went there. And then the students would come back and write about it. In fact, one of my students who I was hoping would be here did a free write based on following Lilith all over the campus. And I might read that. Do you want me to read that now?
Yeah, read that one and maybe another couple about
Okay.
attention.
Okay, this is Richmond Luzar, who I think he works for the Democratic Party now, which means he's always busy. It says, what I wrote in class following the Lilith Walk, February 14th, 2019. And you get his handwritten one, then you get the one he typed, and then you get one after he put it in one of those software generators that mixes everything up and makes it silly. So I'll read this straight one. A poem of Lilith's journey. Zig sidewalk, zag grass. Zig sidewalk, zag grass. Stop, check, good go. Zig sidewalk, zag grass. Stop, pee, target marked. Zig sidewalk, zag grass. Stop, shit. Stoked, go. Zig sidewalk, zag grass. Stop, focus, focus, focus. Drag sidewalk, zag grass.
Nice. Do you want to read a couple that you feel like get to that point of like paying attention?
Do I?
I don't know. I have other things to ask you, but
Okay.
I kind of like hearing your voice more than mine.
Okay, let me see. Here's one. This is another kind of sad one, but it's just about things that I would notice more because I was with my dog. Death comes on Friday. Lilith and I failed to scare a chicken beside the sidewalk. It was young but bigger than a chick. It didn't move on its large greenish feet. Its back feathers were down, eyes closed. Was that blood on its throat or simply a streak of red? Lilith was curious but not eager. When finally I poked the chicken gently, its head turned, but nothing else stirred. A rooster crowed nearby. After we walked down the hill a few steps, I turned to look, and the chicken was still there, dying on a Friday morning on a patch of brown dirt in the humid air.
In general, I kind of think of myself as rather introverted, and I can spend a lot of time by myself, but I found that when, in the past 6 months or so, I found myself like talking to strangers, like at the grocery, or I went to the symphony with my friend Claire the other day, and I was talking to people all around me, and I remarked to her, I'm like, I think after coming out of COVID, I've missed just sort of the casual conversations that happened all the time in life, because during the pandemic, that was one thing that was taken away. And when I read your book, it seemed like maybe you never lost that. There's a lot of like making use, I don't want to say use, but treating everyone you meet with respect, to want to know their opinion, or to almost like, or maybe to use a dog sort of way of looking at it. It's like Lilith doesn't discriminate between trees that she sniffs, and it seems like any person that you walk by, you chatted with and talked to. Do you think that's accurate? I guess I'm interested in like how the book reflects sort of there's a sense of that we all need other human beings to talk to, and then there's also a simultaneous sense that human beings drive us crazy. Does that make sense?
Well, one of the things that struck me about Timothy Snyder's book, which is like, it's 10 or 12 ways to fight tyranny. And it's got these rules, how to fight tyranny. And they all seem fairly straightforward, except for the one that I really love is maintain small talk.
That's what
that became really important to me,
Yeah.
because there were a lot of people that I ran into whose opinions just made me crazy, but I also like these people. So on the one hand, making lots of small talk with them was very pleasant. And then there was one day, I'll read this one,
Yeah.
where I really got mad at these two guys at Valley of the Temple Cemetery who were COVID deniers. And they listened to right-wing radio in their little sentry box all the time. And I got really mad at them. And then the next day, I walked along and I thought, well, should I avoid them? And no, I'll just, So ever since then, we've just chatted with each other, and we don't usually broach certain subjects, but that's okay.
One of the magical things about your book, and is those characters became super likable to me. Like they appeared 4 or 5 times, and each time they did, I was like, oh good, they're back. And yet I thought, if I met them in life, I might not think that, or they might not think that about me. But you on the page, it just sort of showed me that your book kind of gave them honor in some way. If you want to read a few poems about them, or one.
There are no children in the house, so I can read all words. At the sentry box. They put people on ventilators because they're dying, I heard myself yelling. They are not putting people on ventilators to make money. My Lilith Walks are usually studies of other people, not in me. I generally try to listen, as I used to in the Alzheimer's home, sussing out voices and angles of thinking. But faced with the 2 men at the sentry box at Valley of the Temple Cemetery, who were telling me that the COVID rates are going down and that hospitals make $300,000 for each COVID patient, hence putting COVID on death certificates for the money, and $200,000 for each person on a ventilator, I became my own subject. The heavyset Polynesian man I often exchanged pleasantries with on the weekends kept pointing to his cell phone. The CDC says the rates are going down. I said the rates are just spiking in new places. I said my husband watches the maps obsessively, the CDC maps. His thinner white guy coworker is the one who gets me yelling, however. I'm telling you facts, he says. Where are you getting your facts? I ask more than once. On the internet. I do research, he responds. I govern my tongue from yelling. I've got a fucking PhD. I know how to do research. But didn't succumb to my own elitism. After all, I'm told privilege is a problem. Show me the facts, I said. The white guy countered with, you won't believe me, so I don't care. I stomped home with Lilith on a shorter leash than usual, an angry older white woman in a red cap walking her dog in the cemetery on a beautifully sunny, windy, cloudy day in Hawaii.
I love that. Do you want to read a couple more about them?
Oh, okay, well, if I can.
Yeah, while you do, I can say that, you know, if that happened to me, I would have probably just avoided that and walked for the rest of my life. And I really admired that you just sort of went back the next day. But then I also wondered if that was Lilith's influence. And I started to think about how different our human interactions are when we have animals around us, you know? And I ask you to do two things at once, but once you find that, I kind of want to ask you about how Lilith changed your view of people.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure I can find the one I was thinking of, which was the Hawaiian guy at the Sentry Box told me about January 6th, like 2 months before it happened. He said, watch out, January 6th, it's gonna be dramatic. And so after January 6th happened, I was walking Lilith to the cemetery and I was thinking, again, of this kind of Timothy Snyder thing, like, you know, I'm just gonna be chill, calm, you know, treat people well. And so I had this whole talking to myself in my head about how I was gonna do this well. And then I got to the Sentry Box and I saw the guy. And I said, is that what you meant by January 6th? And he said, yeah. I said, that was disgusting! the whole thing about equanimity just kind of flew out the window. But I did think of doing this as a test of equanimity. Like,
So you mentioned equanimity in the book. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like what you mean? And
yeah, that was, yeah, it was, here it is, Lilith and the Dharma. I was zooming, since this was the era of Zoom, I was zooming into Dharma teachings by Norman Fisher in California. And Norman Fisher is a poet that I had published, and he's also a Zen priest, so I'm very fond of Norman Fisher. So I was going to his seminar, Lilith and the Dharma. I attended my Dharma seminar with Norman Fisher this afternoon, the subject, equanimity. Then I watched speeches on video by Obama and Harris, the former warning of the end of democracy. Took Lilith for a walk and ran into a neighbor whose dog is a good buddy of hers. He's a gay man who wants out of the military. He has a new roommate, a woman who is perhaps also in the military and moved here recently. Radhika, my daughter, signed them up for giving food to those who need it for every 10,000 steps they take. And he's a true fitness nut. I said I'd just been watching the Democratic Convention, which elicited not me's from the two of them, and a sigh from Radhika. He said he'd not vote for Trump, having voted for Mickey Mouse instead of Obama, because he doesn't like the way Trump treats people. I injected something about Trump's being a criminal, whereupon his friend declared they all are. I argued that point to no effect. Radhika and I returned home, and I pondered the difficulties of equanimity. Radhika will tell you her mother still instigates such arguments on a regular basis.
That line I have to ask you about. First, I want to ask you about equanimity. What's the word mean exactly?
Ask me that.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm so very...
No, I mean, it's, faced with any situation, you approach it with a kind of detachment, and you
Yeah.
don't just like leap emotionally into the moment, which is what I kept doing.
Yeah. So, do you think Lilith is an equanimous dog?
She usually has a lot of equanimity, and she's usually very good with other dogs, but there have been occasions where she has just gone off on somebody for some reason I do not understand.
Talk about you.
She's wagging her tail. So she's usually got a lot of equanimity, and she's also helped me because there are people on the walks who I found out about them through other sources. I'm such a snoop. Found out about them through other sources that they're just not nice people, right? Although they're nice to me. And there was this one guy who I heard some not so nice things about him, but he kept giving Lilith treats. I'm like, there's gotta be some good bone in this guy's body. He likes my dog.
Definitely.
So, I mean, one of the things I really liked was sort of the ambiguity of, I'm having these fights with people over politics, and Lilith is just waiting for the treat to come from the person that I'm arguing with. And there's a real lesson in that, I think, of, okay.
That comes through in the book. So you read two of the pieces that I really was hoping you would read, and one of them that you read a couple poems ago, you talk about how you're a listener, and then in this one, you talk about how Radhika says you're always picking fights. And it seems like those are kind of the two poles of the book, maybe. There's like the close attention, and then there's the, I wouldn't say you pick fights, but you do. You don't run away from that. You pick fights. So yeah, can you maybe just talk a little bit about how the listener and the fighter, and there was the one reference to you as an angry older white woman in a red cap, how those personas kind of all fit together?
Well, Chris McKinney did a review of the book, and he said I was very Kaneohe.
What does that mean?
Well, he seems to think that people in Kaneohe are kind of aggressive.
Okay.
I didn't really realize that, but I thought, yeah, I'm Kaneohe.
Yeah.
That's fine with me.
But you're also Buddhist, or you're...
I'm also half Irish.
Yeah, okay,
There are
got
a
it.
number of complicating factors here.
Got it.
So, it has something to do with my character. I'm afraid that it's.
It comes out very well in the book. It makes me, like I said, it brings that universal, and I found myself not necessarily thinking I'm the same way, but it actually made me think about the way I interact with other people, and the way I keep thinking, because I have parrots. My parrots never leave the house. So the idea of having a dog out in the world, it seems like, I think people maybe do you think they treat you better, or they see the dog first, or it seems like two humans who run into each other in a park interact differently than two humans with two dogs, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, you usually start out talking about the dogs,
Yeah.
if not begging for a poop bag,
Yeah.
which also happens. But yeah, that would be the kind of the beginning of the conversation. Would be something about the dogs. What's your dog's name? What kind of dog? Everyone asks me what kind of dog Lilith is, and I say, your guess is as good as mine. So that would start it off, and I think what surprised me was how quickly many of these conversations would just leap into something really profound. And I was like, oh, here we go again, right? Another moment of where that detail goes into some sort of other realm.
Do you have a couple examples that do that you could read?
There's, walk after rain. I took Lilith on a walk between sieges of rain. At Huimanu Park, we ran into one of the neighborhood condo maintenance guys, a short white man with salt and pepper crew cut, there for Bible study. I'd seen him at one of the picnic tables before with another man and a couple of thick books. Lilith ran up to him. "I love that dog," he said. He'd had a small dog named Baby, so I told him we run into another dog with that name on our walks. A small orange dog who walks with a rather mangy Jack Russell called Prince. He asked how old Lilith is. "Not quite 3, I said. "Oh, she might outlive you guys," he said. "But that's okay, because I've never felt such pain as when Baby died. I was sleeping in the closet with her. The meds were $500 and didn't work because she was so old. I could cry just standing here. I don't want to meddle or anything. I just hate living with regrets." "Walk safe," he said, as Lilith and I moved on. And then this guy got fired from his job. It was just, for something else,
Yeah.
obviously, but.
I thought that one was gonna be the one, is there the one in there where the neighbors knock and the urn falls down off the wall? I thought that was pretty amazing.
Well, you're gonna have to keep talking for a minute because, I'll have to find that.
Well, again, that one, I live in a condo and, you know, you kind of are self-conscious about wanting to make sure that you have your privacy, but that your privacy and your way of living doesn't impinge on others. And that one really made me think about that, how we all share a common wall, but then it also had the very macabre thing about the urn falling, right?
Yeah, and this was, after we went to the cemetery with, my late father-in-law's ashes. A box of ashes. The woman who handed us his ashes in a pink cardboard box inside a pink tote bag said she'd seen me and Lilith in the morning walking. Small dog who struts, yeah, so cute. The woman who handed us his ashes in a pink box lingered to chat. Across from us, a woman in sunglasses sat on a long bench, her mouth set. An employee said to her as he strutted by, "They just need to design the headstone." He wiped sweat from the back of his bald and sunburned head, disappeared into an office door, and then walked by the other way. A stone gargoyle stands in front of the air conditioning units near the benches we sit on. I tell the woman who handed us the ashes that my mother is still in my closet. Our late cat is still in a tin near the television. My neighbor says her dog's ashes nearly fell off their resting place when her neighbors banged on the wall. Her living dogs bark. She would have killed them if they knocked her Ginger's ashes on the floor.
That's amazing, I love that one. Was your first cat the one in the urn, is that Tortilla?
Yeah, actually, he was our second
It was
cat,
your
but that was Tortilla,
I think
yeah.
maybe one of the first times I met you or went over to your house, you told me that you said something to your daughter about eating tortilla, meaning the food, and she thought you were gonna eat the cat or something.
Yes.
And that makes me just wanna ask about the dog's attachment to your family. Can you tell like how Lilith came into your family and just a few Lilith origin stories?
Well, she was a Humane Society dog, and the kids, who were obviously younger at the time, wanted a dog. So one day I just said, "Let's go get a dog," just out of thin air. And so we went to the Humane Society, and here she was.
First trip to this Humane Society?
First trip. She didn't really know how to walk on a leash. She was like pulling and dragging, and she was clearly a handful. But we left with her, and then my daughter revealed that she had wanted a fluffy dog. So we had to have a little talk about, when you end up with a short-haired, straight-haired dog, you love that dog, even if it's not.
So when I got parrots, I read a bunch of parrot books, and I don't know if I can say this coherently, but one of the things that I got from some of the books was that, yeah, you don't you don't try to change the parrot. If a parrot is a biter or something, you say, okay, I'm gonna find a way to give this biting parrot the best life it can have in the circumstances that I can give it. Instead of saying, I want my parrot to talk or whatever, you know? And I feel like that's something animals teach us, is to let them be who they are. And maybe that comes across in your book, that there's a sense of you letting people be who they are, and they letting.
Well, I'm trying.
Yeah, and then you are who you are. I love that. So that makes me want to ask you to read anything you want to read, but if there's something in there about the family connection, I know there are pieces about your family, or if you think there are some about just the maybe more Lilith-centric ones about Lilith being Lilith.
Yeah. I was hoping that Jack's person would be here. You're here! Phoebe!
Yay.
This one's for you. Lilith in love.
They're talking about you.
I take Lilith out for a last walk, pee break, at 8 or 9 p.m. We often end up walking with Jack, an orange part Basenji with close-set eyes and a curly tail. Often the walks turn into extended wrestling matches. Lilith especially likes to bite Jack's ears. Last night I took her out a bit early and we did our usual one circle around the parking area, but she wouldn't come in, so we did another, and then another. She stopped a couple times near Jack's gate and stared in its direction. She kept stopping to listen. Jack has a distinctive collar tag sound. Finally, I barged through Jack's gate and called out to his people. Lilith won't go home until she sees Jack. His Phoebe brought him out, whereupon Lilith and Jack ignored each other, and we finally walked home.
I love that. That was so good. Do you have any other Lilith ones?
They're Lilithy ones. Oh, they're all Lilithy.
I know, that's why you can just open the book at any page and we will be delighted.
Lilith gets stung.
There you go.
And this has the Sentry Box guys in it too, from a rather different perspective. Lilith gets stung. On Saturday we walked the cemetery with a friend. I pulled out my phone to take a photo of clusters of bright yellow cut palm seeds when Lilith leapt in like luster. It was then I noticed the bees, lots of bees. Lilith jumped, her eyes astonished, and ran out of the foliage, madly shaking her left paw. A bee fell from her paw and she ate it. But when she started to walk again, she hobbled, favoring that paw. The guys at the guard shack, the ones I yelled at the other week for claiming that hospitals are making money off ventilators, leaned out and said she probably still had the stinger in her paw. So I raised her left leg, inspected the pads, the spaces between claws, and then brushed off a small object I hoped was the offending stinger. We resumed our walk. She limped, but less. When we got to a turning point, I said we should head home. But Lilith pulled on the leash, wanting to go farther. So we walked to the top of the cemetery, right up against the ko'olau, and looked back on mountains and turquoise ocean, clouds and dots of cut flowers.
Sometimes when I'm talking to students about, I teach high school students, and I'm talking to them about creativity, and I want to make the point that I think all humans are creative, I'll ask them if they think non-human animals are creative. And then this book, I'm 90% tongue-in-cheek when I ask this, but I also, 10% of me wonders if Lilith is a writer. So do you think Lilith knows that she's inspirational to you like this? Or maybe the idea of knowing is totally different with dogs.
Yeah, well, we do have this arrangement now, a negotiated space where she gets the time to do her sniffing, and then I get the time to take my photos.
Oh.
Or to have these conversations. So we've gotten to.
Is she getting patient?
Well, there's one story in here where she literally dragged me away, but usually she's quite patient,
Yeah,
and usually I'm quite patient.
it's good. Do you wanna read that one, or,
Oh,
or you have to find it?
well, I know where it is. This is kind of a longer one, and it's,
If you want to.
The Bard of
Oh,
Ka'ava.
this is a nice one.
Bryant was playing pickleball, and I wandered off in Swansea Park and ran into a Lilith story. She was sitting on a rock wall in front of the small beach at Swansea in Ka'ava, writing in a notebook. I wondered who she was, so earnestly scribbling. In front of her were 3 bags, one from Target, faded. Lilith and I stood some distance from her when she began to talk. I have telepathy with animals, she told us, though she never once looked at Lilith. Behind her was a reef formation at low tide that she told me was a lion. The head was cut off just to the left and above it. Her father had been murdered. He was Arthur, and came to her by way of sand drawings. I was standing on one of them just then. I quickly moved my feet, but she said it was okay. Her voice was fast, English, and urgent. There was a large vertical bending line in her forehead beneath gray hair. Her father complained that he had to carry her on his shoulders, explain everything to her, but he responded when she asked the Aina for answers. He carried a lion. But now she was here and she knew. There'd been seashell gatherers in the Pacific, women who were attacked from behind by gorillas and raped. The product of these unions were creatures that were only partly human. Some had 3 heads, others, the ones near the hygienic store down the coast, had half a human head, half bird beak. Those were parrots.
Wow.
There were mo'o involved, and Knights Templar, and lots of violence. Somewhere men had their skin flayed on rocks and bled. She'd taken photographs in Ha'ena on Kauai of a temple where animals lived in the trees, having constant sex. But her phone didn't have a charge. The Mormons called the formation behind her Kolob, which to her stands for knockout lobster, though she's not Mormon. Do I know the Edward Lear poem Jumblies? I smile. She'd been in a garden in Honolulu that was pea green, and there were sieves in the water. She wrote out pi r squared in the sand, said the 2 T's were Turner Temple. Some had left here for Ethiopia, which has HI in it. This very place was of the origin of the world. In one of these sentences, English royalty appeared. But the mountains were smelters where everything was built, and this was Atlantis, the lost island. Lilith started pulling hard on her leash, so I patted my heart with my hand and said I had to go. I'm Susan. I'm Belinda, she said. Near the end, she said, I let you say that one thing about the lion on the mountain. And she was right. I got my few words in early on.
I started, when I read that one, I started thinking about fairy tales and legends and myths and other things I've read about Hawaii, and I started thinking that at first this sort of seemed the opposite of that. There's a blurb on the back that calls it realist flash or something. But then there is a weird take on like the hero's journey. It's like, you know, human goes on a journey, something happens to them, they accomplish a goal, but in your journey is the same place every day in the same circle, but all these things happen. You encounter all these things. So in my head, this fits with tales and legends and the legends of Lilith or
She's
something
trying
like
to
that.
talk to you.
Hey, buddy.
Well, this was not on the usual circle,
Okay.
but it's on the windward side, and
I mean,
so-
I don't know if that makes sense to you, but do you have a sense of like, there is it's ironically journeying in a weird way? Yeah.
and it's often in circles.
Yeah, but something happens every time.
Around the
And there's-
block,
yeah.
around the cemetery, around Kolau shopping area. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes well, I honestly feel like you make plain things sacred, you know what I mean? No?
That's very kind of you.
No, it's true, that's what I think the art of poetry
You make
can
sacred
be.
things
You
plain
can make
sometimes
sacred,
too.
yeah, I think that's what it is, yeah. Do you wanna see if anyone has questions?
Sure, I'm open to,
So I don't
comments,
have,
complaints.
you don't have to only listen to me talk, does anyone have any
Want your money
questions?
back?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You have this ability to make your images kind of long, where they stay with you and you're kind of just ringing in you as you finish reading. How did photography change your writing?
Wow. Well, this book is very different from like all my other books. Because I generally completely distrust narrative. And I would tell everybody in the English department, narrative's terrible. You can't trust narrative. And so all the books I wrote were like, there would be little stories in them, but then they'd break off and they'd go other places. And so I find it a little funny to be presenting myself as this book, you know. But the photography I think may have a little part of that in the sense that photography has you looking for a moment that sticks out, and once you take the photograph and it turns into something slightly different. So these are a little bit like that you find this moment in time, and for some reason I decided narrative was okay this time around. But yeah, and I've gotten really interested in photography, so now these walks are like Lilith and the camera walks.
Do you think that's the next project, or?
I'm writing about taking photos now.
Awesome.
I now have, there's a eucalyptus tree I'm completely obsessed with that has, you know, the bark is coming down and there's this black tar sack coming and things are hanging off the tree and geckos get stuck in the tree and they turn into skeletons. And so I have taken 1,000 pictures of this tree, so now I'm trying to write about that,
Cool.
sort of.
Awesome. Do you want to ask a question? Do you want to read a poem?
When with my parents, they eat my books somewhat, and because they like to chew things, and when they do, instead of being mad at them, I decide that they have taste. So if they really like it, it means they like it. So I can imagine Lilith having taste in books too. I would imagine this will be Lilith's favorite.
Claire?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, while you were writing this book, if you ever had any experiences walking Lilith that you did not want to share, you didn't want that to be, and you wouldn't have to describe what happened.
Yeah.
But, like you just made a decision that you wouldn't want that in the book.
Yeah, I can think of one. There was a neighbor, she's gone now, but she, oh my gosh, she would say everything, you know? And one day she was telling me stuff about her mother, and it was getting kind of gory. And I started writing it down. I'll just leave this one in the ether. There may be ones in here I should have left out, but that's the one I actually did leave out. But yeah, I've had that problem in several of my projects, that they get very personal and things that are considered private, and I find myself writing them, and then often I'll just think, well, actually, this needs to be told. But that one didn't, that story didn't need to be told.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, like along those same lines, I was just wondering, do you ever get worried about people in the book, like finding the book and then reading it and being like, what the hell? She's like, you know.
Well, not all of my neighbors know about the book. Phoebe behind you knows about the book. But there are neighbors who actually appear in this book who I hope never find out.
So you're just hoping.
I'm just
Like-
hoping, I mean, I don't name them.
Yeah.
I was surprised actually when I read Charlene's name, cause I was trying not to name people, but she was there, but the other people aren't mentioned by
And
name.
how would you navigate that if somebody did find it
Yeah.
and
Actually,
upset?
the two stories are about neighbors who won't talk to me. So what could they do to me next? Not talk to me more? So,
I,
so there's
I
that.
do think about that myself a lot, and I actually find it to be a rich sort of, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but it's rich for mining and creatively, that sort of ethic about like, do stories belong, if I have a story that involves someone else, which most stories do, does that story belong to me or does it belong to them? And this, my version of an encounter will be different from their version of the same encounter.
Yeah, well, this
So-
doesn't claim to be,
Well, I wonder if that word ethic means anything to you, but do you feel like there's an ethical way to write about other people and then an unethical way to write about other people, or?
I think it's always a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a question. Case by case basis, maybe?
Yeah.
I
there's a
don't
truth-
wanna write something that'll hurt somebody.
Right,
Or get them hurt,
yeah,
you know? On the other hand, to me, they are very detail specific, they're very, like you were saying, they're very, very specific to place and time, but they're also just the things people say, they're doing that from the beginning of time.
yeah.
So,
And I feel like you give a dignity to everyone in the book, actually. There's no one in the book that you're condescending to.
right. No, I don't, I liked everybody in the book,
Yeah.
actually.
And I think maybe Lilith has something to do with that, in the sense that, when we walk around with our animals, maybe we give our best selves, I'm not sure.
Well, and there's been this strange afterlife to this where the book came out and I would go on walks with Lilith and I'd say, Lilith and I have a book out. And I realized it was like, this is my sales opportunity. And so I started telling people about this book, how we went on walks and we ran into people and we had conversations with them and then I wrote them down and every so often someone would kind of look at me funny, but I think I sold a few books that way.
That's awesome. You'll have to give Lilith some treat for every book you sell, one treat or something.
Are you?
I was just curious, like, that first story you read was kind of intriguing. Would you ever wanna find out what happened to the people, maybe?
The divorce.
Oh, I
10 years
know,
from
I Googled and I think I found out a little bit more about the story, but the trail ended and then the neighbor and the woman with the chihuahuas moved to Arizona or something, so, yeah, actually I've done a lot of research based on walks in the cemetery, because like there's one area in the cemetery where there are like 6 graves of one family within a 2-year span or something, so I've Googled all of them. Cause you do get really curious. Murakami gave this talk where he said, I hate the internet because I wrote a whole book based on seeing someone's t-shirt and not knowing what it meant. So he was able to just make it up. But I'm more like, no, I wanna know about these people, who they are, and you know what, hidden inspiration for this book was your mom's short flash fictions, one of which was Conehead Marching. I don't know if you remember that one. I published it in Tin Fish, and it was about a little boy who wore a cone on his head and walked around a neighborhood. This is Marie Hara's daughter, Marie was just so dear to me, and so those stories were really, they haven't been published, except here and there, but they really should be a book.
I think she would have loved to read this book because
Conehead marching, and there was one other I remember publishing.
Any other questions? Do you want to read some more? A couple more? No?
Yeah, read some
Read a
more.
couple
I'm
more.
tired.
No, read some more.
Read some more, and then we can
No, read
call it
some
a
more,
day, but
please.
read some more.
Maria!
I love them.
You know, maybe you wanna buy a copy.
I will.
Can you?
Okay, there is this guy.
And then I have a request after you read this one.
There is this guy who is the hero of this book.
Oh, cool.
I think of him as a hero. This is Jared down the street. Jared is not what he appears to be. I love Jared. But now that he's quit smoking, he's not outside much anymore to talk to. Phoebe knows him too. And again, I hope no one is a hardcore Trump supporter in here. I guess you would have walked out by now. Lilith and the Rice Rocketeer. Now that's what I want that shirt. The ginger-haired howly guy with the rice rocket said, coming home from work. A bottle of Coke and plastic bag of what was left of lunch on one arm, cigarette in the other hand. If we could just have him back. I was wearing my blue Obama 08 shirt, now a sign of the resistance, as I told him. He had tats and spoke with a strong pigeon-inflected accent. His white souped-up car had been a VW with Mercedes rims. Today it had no markings, though a logo vaguely resembling BMW was stamped on the hubcaps. They can't be hubcaps, I simply don't know the lexicon. The front grille was gone. His car is obviously a work in progress. He walked toward the front door, loudly proclaiming he didn't know why anyone would want someone who talks like that as president. During one of his gestures, his cigarette fell near his front door. I didn't notice if he picked it up or lit another, but soon he was back out near the sidewalk waving a lit cigarette. I just don't get it. They all watch Fox. What's with those fuckers who are obsessed with him, he asked, rhetorically, as his right arm swept forward into the side. Remember Megyn Kelly? He asked me. Remember she asked him about calling women horrible names? And then he said, only about Rosie O'Donnell. My neighbor looks stricken. He just doesn't talk like a president. I hate him. Can you believe people are buying guns now? The Second Amendment, that was all about slavery. Our final exchange was about Trump's possibly canceling the election. Then he walked to his front door with one last whole butt, and Lilith and I continued on our walk. Tiari helped me with some of the little scatterings of pigeon in here. But she wasn't strict enough. She was just like,
When I asked before about the two Lilith-centric ones, or reading
Mhm.
Lilith, the two that come to mind for me are, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Pomelo
oh.
and the Chicken and the Chasing Chickens. I think those are back to back, maybe.
Okay, and then I'll stop.
And then, yeah, sure.
Then I'll stop. Yeah.
But I love those two. I think 56.
56. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lilith scores a pomelo. Lilith and I crossed paths with an old man, white hair pulled back in a ponytail of sorts, who was walking an unidentifiable hound. My guess is that he was Hawaiian Chinese. He started to cross the road, stopped, asked if my dog were male or female. I said female, and he came across to our side of the street. Lilith and Milo, that was his dog, sniffed and inspected each other, while the man and I began to talk. He said he lives up a Huimanu Road, farms 10 acres up in Kahuku. After 10 years, too many weeds now, he grumbled. The dog found him. He and his wife have 3 cats, but the original female, who was queen of the house, gives the newer female cat a very hard time. Oh, Barack, he said, looking at my Obama 2008 Hawaii shirt. It's a different shirt. I said I'd been watching a live stream from DC of protests. He guessed I was watching MSNBC. He lived in Philly and traveled a lot to DC in the 50s in the service. Went to college in North Dakota. So many different people in Miami. It was as if the rest of the U.S. kind of spilled down into it. The U.S. is full of so many kinds of people, he said, like groups of animals, he said. He asked what I teach at UH, and I said English. His face contorted a bit behind his big glasses. Oh, local boys and grammar. Language is much more than grammar, I said. He taught at Kahuku for many years, was a high school counselor, even coached the football team. That was how he bonded with the boys. He pointed to his forehead, said St. Louis, because I was wearing my scruffy Cards cap. Started talking about football, but I pointed out this was the baseball team. He was wearing a yellow sleeveless t-shirt with baseball bat logo and something indicating he was an over 70 player. You remember Stan Musial? Really? Gibson, Flood, Rock, I do. Oh, the generation after, great team. Lilith barked at a woman who walked by. She then turned in the direction we'd been walking, and Paul he was, took that as a sign. I went downhill and he up. Some 50 feet later I hear, Susan! And turned to see him heading for an old SUV parked near where Lilith and I are standing. She's sniffing. Disappeared behind the driver's side of the car, came back with a large round piece of fruit. Asked me if I knew what it was, and I failed the quiz. Said, it's a pomelo, like grapefruit but better. Don't eat it if you take heart medicine. I thanked him. He got in the SUV and Lilith and I continued down the road. We soon turned back because pomelo. Why don't I just leave it at that?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for chatting with me.
Thank you so
Thank you,
So thank you so much, everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It was so fun.
It was fun.
And books are available at the register. Please stay and chat with Susan.